All right. Good. Is it good? Good evening, everyone. Just checking if you can hear me. It turns out I'm using a completely different setup. So I'm using a different computer, and I'm not sure if I'm audible enough. I would appreciate it if somebody would confirm, please.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay. Thanks very much, sir. All right. So we're going to continue our discussion of lecture series number 2, or module number 2. I prefer to refer to these things as modules because what you soon discover is there are certain modules that will involve us discussing a whole range of things. So in so-called integration configuration, or as some people rightly reminded us, this process which is sometimes referred to as software reuse, right? So this idea that you can go out there and identify appropriate software components or libraries or packages, collections as they're called sometimes, so that you can quickly implement your solution, your software solution. And we discovered that there's actually a number of ways of integrating these reusable components, right? Or these packages or libraries. Ideally, you can integrate these components at the service level, or it could be at the level when you're actually implementing the source code, right? So at the service level, what you'd be doing is installing a full-fledged service and just configure it in such a way that it's able to interact seamlessly with your application. I always like giving an example of these search services. It's almost unheard of to have an application that is not integrated with a search service because of the sheer volume of information or data that we have begun to generate. It becomes necessary for you to index the data so that you can easily search through it or so that you can easily browse through it. Whilst there are a number of search services, some of the most commonly used ones are things like Apache Solar, Elasticsearch, and Lucene. Interesting thing is all of these libraries, they come from the same source. So the base library is usually Lucene, and then the others are just layers built on top implemented on top of the Lucene library. Right, so just one of many examples where you're doing the integration at the service level. But there's other examples that perhaps we should be, but I hope we are familiar. I'm not sure what's happening with my new computer here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have to switch to my usual computer because this thing appears to have frozen for some weird reason. I don't know why. Just give me a second. I apologize for that. What I'm going to do is I'll just switch to my other computer because this thing here is not. So just bear with me. Let me just switch to a different computer. I think. All right. So checking again if you can hear me and also if you can see my my screen. So I have just shared my screen. Don't know if you can see my screen. I know you can see my screen because I have it open on the other computer, so I can see it. But here's to hoping you can hear me. So I'll just attempting to give another example that you can perhaps always, well, not always, but something that you can easily relate to. And I think I introduced this notion yesterday, right? The comment feature that you normally have in these websites, right? What you're integrating there is a full-fledged service, right? So you'd be maybe making use of Facebook, the Facebook Graph API, for instance, to enable you to render comments made by users using their Facebook credentials. What's interesting is that the average user will not know, right? You just say log in with Facebook and then boom, before you know it, your comment is being synchronized all over, your comments are being synchronized all over. But not that it's a big issue anyway, because this thing. There we go. Not that it's a big issue anyway, but so I thought I'd mention that as a classic example as well. Right, so you're doing this integration at the service level or down at the implementation level, right, where you're writing the source code. And in fact, most of the examples I was giving when we met last were really linked to how you go about performing this integration during implementation, right? Typically, you use an import statement. It's not always an import statement. This depends on the programming language. Some programming languages will use a completely different syntax, will use different keywords that will enable you to integrate libraries or packages that may already exist. I know Perl, for instance, uses the word use, right, instead of import. So I have use. There's some Java, I do believe, uses the word or the keyword import for you to be able to integrate existing libraries with your application. So we went through a series of examples, which was really good. And then I think we kind of eased our way into web services. We reminded ourselves of the fact that in as much as you don't necessarily use a web browser, right, for you to interact with the web service, but the idea, the interaction itself is similar to the process you go through when you are accessing a resource using the HTTPS protocol, the normal way you access web pages, right? So your client machine, which is either your smartphone or your laptop or something, will send a request to the server, right? So there's a series of things that happen. The server will look at the resource path and all those things, and then ultimately send back a response, right? The thing that is rendered on your web page. So the idea with web services is exactly the same. The only difference is the output that you get, right? It is not as intuitive as what you see when you're accessing web browser. HTML files in this case, right? So you need a special way of interacting with this response. The interesting thing about the response that you get from web services is it's structured, right? So you typically use, so the response is typically presented in the form of a markup language, for instance. It could be XML, or it could be a JSON response, right? So what you're, excuse me, what you're seeing right now is an example of an XML response from a REST API, right? Specifically speaking, in this case, you may not really appreciate what's going on here, but this response is coming from our own departmental document archive, right? So you can literally see here the name of the article, right? Investigating the use of learning object repositories in co-creation of open education resources, and if you look at the, because you haven't yet been introduced to XML, but you can literally see here that there's a predefined structure. There are things that are repeating, right? The parent tag, right, or element is called items, and then the level 2 element is called item. If you notice here, item is closed by an item here. The / means you're closing this, and then right after the closing element here, you have a completely new item. So in essence, what this response is trying to signal is the fact that this slide actually has two items. One has the title investigating the use of learning object repositories in the co-creation of open education resources by educators. And then the other one has the title High School Pupils Experience with E-Learning, EduTV during the coronavirus lockdown, a comparative study of Kablonga boys and Kablonga girls. So whenever you have a predefined structure, you can automate. If you can automate, you can programmatically interact with the response, right? So you can maybe programmatically interact with this response in such a way that you create some nice, appealing HTML page to say, render the name tag for each item, right? Render the title, using the name tag or something. The sort of things you do. Just to showcase different form of output. So this is XML, right? Extended markup language. And what you're looking, extensible markup language, what you're looking at right now is a classic example of a JSON response, right? So again, whilst the syntax appears to be different, which it is, by the way, if you look at here, we have explicit names, right? That tell us what sort of item we're dealing with, right? And an element name is enclosed in these greater than and less than signs here, right? The values are placed in between the elements, right? So this investigating the use of learning object repositories would be the value, item is the value here, type is an element, right? So when you're writing a program that automatically consumes this sort of response, what you'd be doing is you'd be programmatically referring to these elements, right? Say, render the value associated with the link element, or render the value associated with the name element, the same thing. I'm sorry? Yeah, I don't know what that is, but you want to mute your microphone wherever you are. If you look at, I don't know who that is. Could somebody just tell them to perhaps mute themselves or something? Yeah, thanks anyway. Again, what you're seeing here is a completely different way of presenting this output. But then the interesting thing is that this output has structure as well. It's just that the structure is represented differently. So what we introduced as element names here, the elements, items, item, link, expand, name type, UUID, archived, last modified, these are all elements. In here, what we have is a sort of like key value pairs, right? You notice that the key, so the things before the full colon are separated, or the colon separates the key, which is the thing that you have before the full colon here. So the value is on the right-hand side, and the key is on the left. So similarly, you can easily pass through this JSON response, right, by referring to specific keys here. And I don't know if you were introduced to this in Java, but what you realize is that it's a dictionary, is it? You discussed these data structures in 2010, where we were looking at hopefully arrays and is it what do you call this? Arrays and things like dictionaries, I think, or something. I don't know if you discussed this. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I don't know what the silence means here, right? That's okay. But classic example of JSON response. I have a funny story about web services. I was interacting with, I guess, Miss Bertha Chpangira is a colleague now. So I worked with her before last year when she was in her final year, when they were doing their final year project. And one of the things she was telling me is, oh, I'm working for this company now. Forgotten the name of the company, Union something. And part of what I do now is I find myself testing web services, and I use Postman a lot. I'm like, oh, like you, right? So because it is difficult for you to really interpret the response, the only way you can actually interact with the response is to create a program, right? But before you can commit to writing a program, you might want to test the web service. There are tools for doing that, right? So Postman is a classic, one of the most widely used, I guess one of the most widely used Postman. Postman. And my keyboard here is not, but one of the most widely used platforms. You probably want to look up Postman, right? So you install Postman, and all you do is you provide Postman with an endpoint. You specify the endpoint, and of course there are a few other parameters that you might want to specify, right? Because there are instances when you might want to filter information. Yeah, but anyway, so a web service, right? The documentation for the web service will typically come along with so-called endpoints, right? Different paths to that web service that will enable you to interact with the web service in a number of different ways. So what you're seeing here, this is a web service that I think enables you to extract posts, I suppose, on a WordPress powered blog or website, right? So if we were to change the endpoint, we'd see a completely different output, you know? So this is WordPress, right? This is from an application called DSpace, right? It's a repository software platform. WordPress is one of the most widely used content management systems. If you remember your EDU 1020, there was a point when you were introduced to content management systems, right? These generic applications that enable you to manage content, web content, right? You don't have to implement a web application from scratch. So UNZA uses a content management system called Drupal, for instance. Lighton's website uses a content management system called WordPress. Lusaka Times uses WordPress. Zambian Watchdog uses WordPress. You know, Go Zambia Jobs uses WordPress. You know, Mwewant uses WordPress. WordPress is probably one of the most widely used content management systems. There's a whole bunch of content management systems available out there. I do encourage you to just look up a list of content management systems, and then you will see that in fact a number of them out there. You know, but there's more, right? It turns out that because interoperability has become a crucial component of the web, you rarely have applications that function in isolation. Your average web application will probably be consuming data coming from a completely different platform, right? And because of that, it's become commonplace to have a situation where an application is implemented with corresponding web services. So if you ever find yourself developing a web application for somebody, one of the requirements is going to be, we want to be able to exchange information from our system with another system. What that requirement is signaling to you is implement a web service, right? So that you have APIs that other systems can use to consume data from that application. What we have on the screen is the YouTube data API. So you can interact with YouTube via a publicly available API. Of course, you need to authenticate yourself. The interesting thing about something like that is, and I'm sure I'll leave it to your imagination, but point out the obvious benefits of having an API associated with YouTube. You can easily create an application that filters content coming from Zambian YouTube channels, for instance, right? So you'd have whoever is using that application, when they're searching through content from Zambian YouTube channels. And in fact, if you go to YouTube and you start playing around, YouTube has implemented this really nice interface where you can try out the API, right? So you don't necessarily have to use Postman. You can try out the API using their interface and, you know, change a whole bunch of parameters, you know, filter content specific for username. So if you wanted to filter content coming in from Lighton's channel, for instance, you can do that, right? Exciting stuff. if you look at the sort of interaction that happens on platforms like YouTube, you begin to appreciate the importance of having these web services, right? Think of the rich data that you find in the below the comments, right? So if you look at the comments feature of YouTube, right, there's not all the time, sometimes it will be spam, but in some instances, depending on the type of channel you're looking at, there's usually very useful information there. So think of what you can build there if you were to pull the comments, right, associated with the YouTube channel. You know, last year we had one of the projects where students were required to build this really nice platform that was extracting videos from YouTube that were related to topics covered in ICT 1110. Right, so this would be like a dedicated application that would be used by, let's say, a new student who is enrolled into ICT 1110. They access the application and they only have access to videos associated with the different topics in that course. You know, so quite a bit of things there, right? I don't know if people have thoughts about this, but I thought would immediately look at the sort of process that you go through, right? Once you decide to use integration and configuration, software reuse or something. Any thoughts about this? Experiences that you would want to share with us, the rest of the class? Okay, well, we'll ask you to share your thoughts in the test anyway. That's okay. Turns out learning is much more enjoyable when you're having a back and forth interaction. We're not in grade 2 here, right? Where we have to recite things. It'd be nice if we had a bit of back and forth, but of course that's optional, it's not mandatory. So very simple process, right? Showcasing the series of steps you'd have to follow when you're leveraging integration and configuration, right? So your requirement specification will signal whether or not you would want to take advantage of integration and configuration. Right, so you don't just dive in from the outset to say, I am going to use integration and configuration. It's usually the case that the choice comes out of the requirements engineering process, right? So what you do, you notice here, by the way, this is a classic example of an activity diagram, right? We'll discuss activity diagrams when we look at the unified modeling language here. So you start with requirement specification, and then once you realize to say, well, this requirement, right, from the SRS document can be worked through by taking advantage of an existing software component or a library or something. So, but the question is what library, right? So you go through a process of software discovery where you're looking for a specific library that may be appropriate to whatever it is you're building, right? And then after you do that, you notice that you have to refine the requirements. Why do you think we have to refine the requirements after we come from software discovery? So we go out there, we're looking for software components. We want to use maybe the NPM repository or perhaps the pip repository, right? Python package index. Sorry, there's a bit of noise. I'm broadcasting from the house. Why do you think we'd want to refine the requirements here? Shocking. No, none of the people, the 35 minus 2, because there's a TODV recorder, and then there's me, I guess. I can't see the people raising up your hands. Just speak through the microphone, right? It's fine. I just had a sign that somebody raised up their hands. Please tell us what you're thinking. Why are we refining? Why do we have to refine requirements here? Okay, that's fine. Probably ask that question. I'll mark it somewhere so that I ask it. So you requirements discover and then you refine the requirements. Because you're refining the requirements, right? If it turns out that yes, you have to refine the requirements, you go back here and you modify the requirement specification document, right? In fact, this decision here was supposed to come before here, so that if it's a yes, refine the requirements. If it's a yes, then you go back here. If it's a no, you proceed forward. This is how this thing works. It's a condition, right? It allows you to take different paths. Anyway, I don't know what's happening here, right? I hope that noise is not it's not a distraction. Why do people do that? But right. So if it turns out that you don't have to refine the requirements, then you proceed, right? You configure your application. You're configuring your application here because you're integrating it with an already existing component, right? So you need to make sure that it actually works without any issues, right? When integrated with your application, you notice that something else that you can do, depending on, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? This notion we introduced last time that integration and configuration is done at different levels, right? So you'd configure your application if you're using a full-fledged service, right? If you're doing this, if the integration is being done at the service level. But if you're using a component, a collection, a library, a package, you see here, you adopt a component and then you integrate it with the system, right? Or alternatively, you might decide to say, you know what, you're going to make changes, maybe make enhancements to the component that you found, so you develop a new component or something, and you integrate it with the system. So I think this is very intuitive, and it really speaks to some of the things we were highlighting in the previous class, right? Any thoughts about this diagram, the workflow associated with integration and configuration? Okay, you will notice here that at some stage, when you refine the requirements, you would loop back here, you make changes to the software requirement specification after you discover this thing, and then you evaluate whether or not the piece of software is appropriate for what you're doing, right? And then you proceed or something. Right, so just highlighting or just really enumerating these different activities or process activities associated with integration and configuration, right? Just listing the things we are seeing here, right? You first of all, so everything stems from the requirement specification. This will determine whether or not you're going to want to use integration and configuration. If you are, then what you do is you go out there and you look for an appropriate software component, and we know where to go, right? There are plenty of repositories, GitHub, Marvin, NPM. What else is there? Yearn, right? I've never used Yearn myself, but if you look up, sorry about that. If you look up things like Yearn, I mean, so there's so many different repositories that you use to actually pull things from out there, reusable components. This is how important integration and configuration is, right? And then you have to refine your requirements, obviously, so that whatever it is you're building is modified to be able to seamlessly integrate with whatever component you find, right? Once you refine the requirements, you will configure your application, or alternatively, adapt the component and then integrate it with the system. Any thoughts about what would be, we'll start with good about integration and configuration? We need to, I just say, just speak through the microphone. No need to raise up your hand. Please go ahead if you wish to share your thoughts.
So the good part of integration and configuration is that there is analysis of data that you want to use for the project that you're working on. You analyze the data, whether it will be good for the project or not.
What data are we talking about here?
The requirements. You analyze the requirements, whether they're good or bad for the project that you want to work on.
But you do that, you analyze the requirements irrespective of the software process model, right? And I think you just raised an important point here, right? There are certain things that you will do irrespective of the software process model that you are adopting, whether you're using the waterfall model, otherwise called the traditional model, whether you're using an incremental and iterative process, an agile approach or something like Scrum, or whether you're leveraging integration and configuration. So there will be analysis of data. And we talk about we discuss these processes at length, by the way. I think it's part of this lecture series. But I'm a bit skeptical about that point because you do that irrespective, right? Thanks, though. Any other thoughts about this?
With integration and configuration, I think there
Hello?
is
Okay, am I audible?
more efficiency.
Sorry, Leandro, do you want to say that again? You're saying with integration and configuration what?
Yes, with integration and configuration, there is more efficiency when you're working on a long-time project. And because software packages have already been lined out and they've already been used before, so they are trustworthy. In licensing and the like, it's rare that you can actually get a product software. This package has been used before.
I can understand, sorry to cut you short, Leandro, but just in case I lose this train of thought, I can understand the efficiency part, right? I think this came out of the most recent class we had as well. But trustworthiness, what would you trust more? I'll ask you, right? Or I'll ask what would you trust more? Something that you build yourself or something that somebody else has built? What do you think you trust more?
Something that I've built myself.
Yeah, I know. I'll trust something I've built myself. I'll have more control over that. So the first point, excellent. But the trustworthiness part, I'm not so sure about that, because in most instances, actually, when you're leveraging integration and configuration, you actually end up using that library or the component as a black box. You don't know how it was implemented. You rarely have time to do that. All you need to know is, how do I use this, right? Any other thoughts about this?
Example you gave last time in class, you say it's quicker. You save much more time as compared to building things from scratch.
Well, right. So this is what we understand. Efficiency is exactly that, right? You're quick. So you are able to implement your software much more quickly, right? Rather than starting from scratch, you just pull a component. All you do is you're investing time in learning. You're reading the documentation about the package, about the service you want to reuse. Once you know how to use it, you integrate it, boom, you're done. But when you're writing stuff from scratch, it might take time. Somebody want to say something else?
Yes, Dr. Lighton. Another good part of integration and configuration is that it is cheap, because you'll be just using some components which has been already made.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we do discuss these things, right? And I'm glad some of you are really trying to tie these things we're discussing to 3 key things we obsess about when we're undertaking a software-centric project: time, budget, and quality, right? It is cheap because, you see, programmers are not cheap, right? Very expensive. Well, I guess they're becoming cheap now because there are a lot of people that have gone into programming here. But again, there are a lot of things happening. Programmers are not cheap. You're buying somebody's time here. So there we go. Are you going to choose to pay somebody for 1 month so that they develop a component, or are you just going to maybe look for a reusable component, read the documentation, and then integrate it with your software within a week or something? To do the integration for you, they are going to be paid less because they're doing that over a short period of time. So thank you for pointing out the cost thing here. Very important stuff here. So there's time, and I guess one would argue that perhaps to a certain extent, the quality could potentially be guaranteed, right? Especially if you're using a component that is backed by a reliable entity. Apache Solar. It's been around for years. Any person who wants to integrate a search service with their application will, in all likelihood, use Apache Solar or Elasticsearch. These are all based on Lucene. Anyway, you know. But what about the cons, though? What are some of the bad sides of some of the bad things, disadvantages of integration and configuration?
So one more thing.
I think
Paul is
that
asking
since
that
it
you
is
record the meeting because he's in the library.
Sorry?
Paul is asking that you record the meeting is in the library. He couldn't ask himself because screen was going blurry and then coming back.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I mean, why can't you just walk out of the library and go somewhere near outside the library and broadcast that? But that's fine. Mr. Banda, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to say that one of the drawbacks is that it can be hard for you to configure it the way you want it to be, since you're not the one who started it. You said that it is based on the reuse. So it can be hard sometimes for you to configure it in the way you want it to be.
Right. Well, I wouldn't really put it, what you're saying is, I get what you're saying, but I wouldn't say it would be hard here. If you're trained, if you're an expert who's trained, like you are being trained right now, believe me, integrating something, a piece of software within something that you're building is an easy task, right? But the thing here is, I think the point you are trying to get at is, you should be thinking about is that in some instances, you end up refining the requirements to suit the reusable component, right? Control, you have less control. But anyways, you have less control. In instances where the license permits and you have a larger development team, what you may decide to do is you get the piece of software or component or library, you create a new derivative, right? So you fork it and you modify it so that it suits whatever it is you've decided to build. This is fairly common for people that will build custom software that can be used by different entities. Example I have right now, top of my head, and I discovered this is UNZA SIS. They were approached not too long ago by Chalimbana University to say they wanted an equivalent of the UNZA SIS. When that begins to happen, you know that you should expect another entity. We have a lot of universities that will probably approach UNZA to say, can you also develop equivalent of your SIS? But of course, we have our own unique requirements. When that starts happening and you have reusable components, you may as well just create or modify the reusable components, create a new fork of reusable components so that you start a completely new path, right? You start extending or making modifications to that component to suit whatever applications you're building. So control, thanks about that. Any other thoughts about this? All right, that's okay. So, I mean, I listed some things here. Most of these we've already discussed. The first one is an obvious advantage. The fact that you drastically reduce the cost. The man hours, right, spent on working on that particular feature are going to be reduced. The risk of you not meeting the requirements drastically reduced because you are certain once you identify a software component, you know exactly what it's going to do. If you hire a programmer to say, implement this for us, there's no telling whether or not that programmer is going to manage to build that thing. They may fail to build it, right? Don't know. Anyway, so you're reducing the risks, right? And we discuss risk management. You hopefully get an appreciation for why we're saying you drastically reduce the cost and the risk. So when you leverage integration and configuration, you reduce the cost, the development cost, you reduce the risk of producing software that is of low quality. You reduce the risk of failing or falling behind schedule. You reduce the risk of going beyond the budget limit. You understand this? Of course, somebody already spoke about efficiency, right? You can quickly deliver. Surprise, surprise. Well, build a website for me. Now, you know, people like you probably get really excited, right? You open up your touchpad because now, I don't know if it's Dr. Wad or Mr. Njovi is teaching you HTML or something. You think well, which is okay to think like that, but you want to show off your skills, right? And it's okay to show off your skills. I used to do that when I was young also. You want to show off your skills, but remember that it will take you longer, right? And somebody will even lose faith in you. Are you sure you will deliver? An alternative would be you go out there and you look up what content management systems are available. Oh, there's Joomla, Drupal, you know, PHP, or is it PHP, not PHP Fusion, Drupal, you know, what else is there? Oh, wow, I'm forgetting these things here, but there's a whole bunch of content management systems. You choose, you take your pick, and then you just modify and customize it, right? You brand it so that it reflects the identity of that entity that has approached you to say, build this for us. You quickly deliver. In fact, when you use a content management system, you can deliver a website within weeks, right? Within a week, you can actually deliver that. By the way, this is what I do with my personal website, right? So if you go to my website, for instance, I don't know if I've mentioned this in the past, but wow. I don't know what's happening with my thing here, but I think I saw it. There we go. If you go to my website, this is a WordPress powered. It's a WordPress powered website, right? I did not have to create this. I did not have to create this website from scratch. Of course, I've spent a bit of time to customize it so that it looks the way it looks. You know, the colors and all those things. And so but the relative effort that I had to go through to set this thing up, yeah, is much less in comparison to what I would have done if I was building this website from scratch, where I'm creating the HTML pages. Worse still if I'm creating a database-driven web application, right? You know, which is what I do with my lists. I don't know if I can this. Okay, that's fine. All right, I want to showcase my list thing as well, but that's okay. I handcraft the pages there, but I don't need dynamic content on my own web profile, right? The panel profile. It's mostly static information, you know. For this though, I can easily create dynamic content. Like I just posted something on the 14th of March. I just log in and then boom, you know. But anyway, that's okay. So a whole bunch of advantages and disadvantages. I hope this is clear, you know. Efficiency of faster delivery and deployment. Delivery and deployment are two separate things, right? By the way. So, well, sort of like similar anyway. But the second last point here is important. I think it's come up before, where we were saying you'd have to adjust or change your requirements to conform to whatever component you're using, right? So at the midst of the component. So requirement compromise are almost always inevitable here. And on that note, I mean, it leads us to the last point. It's advantage where we're saying you have little control over the evolution of the system. Changes might happen. Maybe the developers of the platform will perhaps decide to abandon the component, right? Or it will take time for them to come up with updates, right, or new features or something.
Dr. Perry.
Right. Yep.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, we can. Hello. Can you hear me?
Oh yes. Oh, Dr. Perry. I wanted to. Oh yes, Dr. Perry.
Yes.
Oh yes. I wanted to just ask about the WordPress. As in, how does it work exactly? I believe last time you mentioned that it's a content management system, but how do how do you set it up? And like you it's just something that you can download and then you just start adding your own web pages or something?
Yeah, so it's well, so the difference between WordPress.org and WordPress.com here, they have a cloud-based service also. But what I'm referring to is the actual application. So it's a piece of software. It's implemented using the PHP programming language. That's the language that they're using, I guess, in your 3010 or something. So what you do is you download it. Because it's a web application which is implemented in PHP, you need to make sure that the platform where you're going to deploy this, where you're going to set up this WordPress thing, needs to have the PHP interpreter, right? So the very first thing you do is once you download it, you obviously have to install prerequisite software components that are required to successfully run WordPress. Now, WordPress, a typical content management system will be database driven, right? It needs a data store. By default, I think, although we can tweak WordPress to use other database management systems, but it's typically integrated with the MySQL or MySQL relational database management system. So you have to install MySQL as well, MySQL. So once you install those prerequisite components, of course, also you need a web server, right? Because this is a web application, it's deployed within a web server, right? So the likes of like Apache or something. So the application that enables people to go to in their browser and type in to say, I want to go to lighton.org, /80 or something, right? For that to work, the server where my website is installed, the server where the source code associated with WordPress is deployed, has Apache running. Apache is a web server, right? So once you install these prerequisite software components, you go through an installation process. Click, 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 actually. It's the same. Although there's certain things that you have to do besides the click, 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 like the configuration of the database, right? Once you install MySQL, you need to create the database itself. So if you create the database and then as you're installing, the database that you've created is populated with tables. But the installation is automated. I mean, I wish I could showcase how some of these things are done. It's trivial stuff, really. Well, maybe not, but yeah, maybe not. It's not hard. It's installing software. At this stage, everybody knows how to install software, right? How do you install software? You read the manual, right? So yeah, so it's a piece of, so you download it actually. You download it and the instructions on how to install it, because, so the interesting thing about web applications is they're OS agnostic, right? They live within a web browser, not a web browser. They live within, or they're deployed within a web server, right? Like Apache. Apache has installers for Windows, Unix-like operating systems. So if you're setting it up on Windows, all you have to do is just install the appropriate Apache web server, right? You install Apache web server by following instructions associated with your OS, and then you run WordPress within that. In fact, things have become so much easier now. There are packages, right? They're packaged software platforms, like they'll say WAMP or LAMP or something, where when you install that thing, it's a bundle of all the prerequisite software components that you need for you to set up that component. So it will come bundled with the relational database management system, the web server, right? And all you do is just click, 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 and for you to run the web server, you just there's a simple there's a tray, I guess, that you use to just start the web server and stop it. But in real life, you don't install a bloated bundle like WAMP or LAMP, right? You install this component separately because you typically deploy these things on server computer systems. You remember our discussion on server computer systems, right? Listen, I don't know if people can think of any other thoughts here. I hope I've answered your question about WordPress, Mr. Mwila.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, these are, by the way, these are some of the things that you want to start looking into, right? There are things that if you are one of those people who's obsessed with money, there are things that can easily bring you a bit of easy money, the task is always to learn how to customize the piece of software, right? So if you look at my way of customizing this, right? What I mean by customizing is the look and feel, because your average user is usually obsessed about how my site looks. Oh, but where is the logo, right? I want this text to be slightly bigger. I want a different font face to be used or something. I want this search button to be on the left, not on the right. You know, can you make it possible for us to see what is it? Besides tweets from our account, can we also see most recent posts from our Facebook account, right? Then you'd integrate it like here. You understand this? Instead of just seeing who is online, can we see whether, can we add a tag to see whether these three users, the one guest here, which country they are from, right? And all of these things are really, because they're leveraging integration and configuration, most of these platforms, these full-fledged services, this is a full-fledged service, right? Most of these services would be implemented in such a way that they make use of what's called a plug-in architecture, right? So you can build these microservices, these small little services that you embed to these applications. And I talk more about other disadvantages when we continue tomorrow. I'm looking at the time, I'm transitioning to a different meeting. But tomorrow, I will continue off by me showing you some bad things associated with integration and configuration. And I like using my blog here because it provides you with a classic example of integration and configuration at the service level and microservice level as well, even at the implementation level, right? Are there any other thoughts or questions about this? All right, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to suggest that we maybe meet same time. Yes, sir, hi.
Sir, there is a question in the messages asking if there is a need to cite a source because you're if there's a need to cite the source because you are practically getting someone else's information, like plagiarism.
What you mean when you are working, when you in real life, or when you're doing this as part of the mini project?
I'm not quite sure in that aspect, but it's a question in the messages.
Well, so the thing with you see, when you're integrating a component, right? Listen, I'll start by using WordPress, right? WordPress is freely available and open source. I think it's open source, unless if things have changed. You, if you want, it's open source. You can go on GitHub and create your own fork and modify your WordPress however you want to. And this is how people have created these cloud-based services, right? You know, other examples that were given to you about content management systems were these tools that we use. Moodle is a content management system, right? It's freely available and open source. Canvas. You've heard of, who uses Astria as an management system? There's no such thing as Astria. It's based on Canvas, right? If you look up Canvas, what you realize is that the people behind Astria got Canvas, modified it, right? Branded it with UNZA information, deployed it as a cloud service, and they came to UNZA and told UNZA, pay money every month, right? And we'll give you access to this service. You know, they don't have to acknowledge that this is using Canvas, because Canvas is freely available, I believe, unless if I'm mistaken. Same goes for WordPress, right? In my case, I don't even acknowledge that I'm using WordPress here because I don't think the license requires that I do that. But if I wanted, I could have easily put a tag here to say powered by WordPress, or if you're using Drupal, powered by Drupal or something. But the license is going to dictate whether or not you're plagiarizing. If you go through the license, if you remember a discussion of licensing in ICT 1110, the license is going to dictate whether you should attribute, right? When you use this piece of software, some of the license restrictions will be that you must explicitly state that this application makes use of this software component, of this library. Do you understand? If this question is tied to the mini projects, the projects you're going to be working on, I have mentioned this. You will be expected to do this, obviously, because part of what you'll be required to do is you will state what software process model you used If you are integrating libraries and services, we expect that you say this, and you will learn exactly how you do this. In the SRS document, at the stage where you're outlining the non-functional requirements, right? You will have the opportunity to state, what usable components you're using. I hope I've answered that question. Security issues, can it also be drawback for integration? Yeah, I mean, so this is great. This actually ties into this notion that you have less control. For the most part, you'll be using these components as black box, right? Ask me, Lighton, do you know how WordPress is implemented? What goes on behind the scenes? No, I don't, right? All I do know is that I go out there, I download WordPress, I install WordPress, and WordPress works. Lighton, do you know how this microservice here, this tweet stream here, I didn't implement this. It's a plugin, it's a piece of software that somebody else implemented. Do you know how this is implemented? Whether someone has malicious code associated with this? I don't know, I use it as a black box. All I did was, I went to the plugin page associated with this plugin. I read the instructions on how to integrate it with WordPress, and then boom, it works. It's a security flaw here. So that is excellent, actually. That's a disadvantage. Also, let's say that the package configured probably causes some problems to your code. I think it would be challenging to notice. Well, if this is again tied to control, right? For you to notice the problem, you'd have to, get your hands dirty, analyze the source code associated with the component. So yes, it's not a form of copying, actually. It's not a form of copying. It's allowed, depending on the license you're using. Hey, listen, this is 1858. I do understand that it's a Friday and maybe people want to go and have a good time, whatever that means. I hope a good time for you is to go and study ICT 3020, or perhaps to go and read up on some of these things we've discussed, so that tomorrow when we meet at 18 hours promptly, you won't be left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you tomorrow at 18 hours. I will, in fact, right now, let me just create, because I don't think we have a class scheduled tomorrow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this and create a class for 18 hours. I hope people are fine with 18. I was going to suggest 17, but I will be somewhere very far, and I suspect I'll only be coming back later. So we have class tomorrow, right? I hope to see you tomorrow, 18 to 19. I always forget here. I think I'm getting old, so I have to log these things in, right? Great. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I ate it.
I thought that as well.
Mapipo raka. Madwarapo.
Yes. I'm not loud, it's just the echo.
It's right, the guy is Gabonese.